The following discussion is not necessarily the views of all involved. The goal is to start open and honest discussion in the Christian worldview. Like all things, weigh what you hear with what you know and join us in our pursuit for the truth. Enjoy the podcast.
This analogy is terrible. This is awful.
Or our other website, Art Watchers.
Art Watchers. Artwatchers.org. Archwalkers is a different domain I also want to own.
Shut up.
The Lord made you special and He loves you very much.
All right, I'd like to welcome everyone to the Second Rate Saints podcast. I'm one of your hosts here, Caleb. To my left is...
I am Joshua. To my left is...
I'm Joel. And to my left...
I'm Colton. And to my left...
It's me, back around, Caleb. Sadly, we are missing Stuart yet again. However, all four of us are here, which feels like it hasn't happened for a while. It's always been some, two, three.
It's been a while.
Yeah, I'm excited. I'm excited about this. Joel, do we do things on the internet?
All the time. Yeah, we got a website, secondраtesaints.com. We've got an email, secondраtesaints@gmail.com. And we've got an Instagram, which is also secondраtesaints. I think it's just at secondраtesaints. However, Instagram does that. We've also started posting on Threads and Twitter because I got bored at work the other day. So... Well, not my pastor work, my different work that I'm not going to disclose to the podcast.
Related to the forklift, though, right?
Related to the forklift. Did I post it online? I did. I posted on the Instagram a picture of my forklift, which I'm not certified to drive, but I did in fact drive. So, yeah, it was a lot of
Interesting.
fun.
Now you can't share where you worked.
Oh yeah, probably. Yeah, so that's what we're doing online. Check us out. We just passed 100 subs on YouTube. We'd really appreciate it if you kept pushing that number upwards. Invite a friend, family member, or another person in fellowship. I don't know. Yeah, I'm gonna have to streamline that somehow.
Invite them to the conversation.
Yeah, invite them to the show.
Send us emails with questions and cool stuff, because
we're getting some content up in here. Yeah,
that sounds like a lie.
Oh yes, sirree. No, we are getting some feedback, both through comments and through emails. Hopefully, they're all going to culminate in a Thoughts in Real Time episode, where I take those ideas that are presented to the podcast by our small community we've began to build, and answered by you guys in real time. Yeah, so look forward to that. What have you read? Who's doing the What Have You Read this week?
What have we read?
What have we read? Oh, that's what I don't
me.
know.
Other than Colton.
What has everyone but Colton read?
Notes from Underground by Fyodor Dostoevsky.
Sorry, can you say that name again?
Dostoevsky.
Is that how you say it?
Sure, that's how I say it.
I actually have no idea
Dostoevsky.
how to say it.
Fyodor Dostoevsky.
I don't think that's it.
Nope.
See, I might be wrong, but I know you're wrong.
There's a buddy of mine that just started listening to the podcast that knows Russian, so maybe we'll get a fan email and voice recording of that.
I don't know if that's going to be a fan email. I think he's going to be very...
No, he'll be a fan.
Very
He's a nice
upset.
guy about it. Yeah.
He stopped listening as soon as we butchered.
He's done. As soon as we said Dostoevsky, he's like, we're out.
However, Notes from Underground, small book, 200 pages, depending on translation, 200, 150, 200, something like that.
Yeah.
How would you describe it? Because my general description has been a man's descent into a weird form of nihilism with philosophical reflection, with unreliable philosophical reflection.
I don't think... I think that's correct, but I don't think it's as sophisticated as that. Like, for the literary critic, it is. But for the person, it's just a man with zero conscientiousness and no friends.
I suppose, but it's difficult not to... Well, he discusses it in the beginning of the book. These stories aren't true, but the people are real.
Yeah.
Right? Like, these people exist in the world, and I think it's very difficult for somebody to walk away from a reading of Notes from Underground without some reflection on the human condition. So I think that it's impossible not to be a literary critic when reading it. Yeah.
I think we thought about talking about Crime and Punishment. That may be the next one, actually. But like Crime and Punishment, there'll be characters in this book, most particularly the main character, mainly because it's such a short book and there's only so many characters to actually get involved with. But in so much of Dostoevsky's work, there are characters, and then every now and then you'll go, "Oh, I've seen that person. He is me," or "I've seen that person. He's so and so," or you'll look at someone and go, "Oh, that's how people do those things." That was my shoulder. Did you guys hear that?
I did.
Cracked a little bit.
Yeah, and that's fascinating. So it's not to spoil the plot, quote unquote. It's kind of an account of a depressed, lonely intellectual who's gotten himself basically into a zero-sum game, into a what's it called, like a Moloch.
You're gonna have to explain what a zero-sum game is for the audience.
Yeah, there's no positive way out. Like there's no, without outside influence, he will only continue to spiral downward.
Yeah.
Right. There's no positive way out. And so, but it's also a reflection on this, like, how do you become a good person when you're in that type of, when you're in such a bad environment that you yourself have constructed? How do you progress? And the thing is you can't.
You can't, at least on your own.
And that's why, and underpinning it, and I don't think it actually comments on it, but the whole thing is kind of a commentary on what humans are without community, I think. To a certain degree.
Yeah, and it's even kind of played on with his job being a government worker who works in a government office and basically retires off of that and just continues to be someone who doesn't necessarily enjoy other people's misery, but is so disinterested in true relationship with human beings that he would, and he's in a zero-sum game. There's nothing he can do to actually increase his enjoyment of life. It's real sad. And the way the book is structured too, and you should look out for this if you read Notes from Underground, is the first section is basically just his journal and his ranting and rambling. That kind of shows you the ideology he's going to be following throughout the rest of the book. Then the second half is an account of his life, of a day in the life of this guy, and it just tore me apart when I read it. It was
No, you read it in one day.
Yeah, I read it
One day.
It was a terrible day. So during COVID, I was quarantining for 2 weeks in a place with no cell service or Wi-Fi.
I remember that.
So I had this book, and I sat with it, and I read it, and I was quarantining with my mom actually, and I was just crying. I was like, "This sucks so bad." But it's one of those books that hits you kind of more emotionally than intellectually.
Were you quarantined and isolated with just Notes from Underground and your mom?
Yeah.
That
Sucks. That, and I read the entirety of Words of Radiance by Brandon Sanderson.
Okay, yeah.
Which is about 1,200 words, 1,200 pages.
Way more optimistic.
Yeah, excellent book. Read anything by Brandon Sanderson. Elantris is like, okay, I'm going through it right now. Anyway, sorry, sidebar. Back to Notes from Underground.
Yeah, I got a slightly different tone from the book, I think, than you two. For me, it was definitely like, yes, he's stuck in a horrible situation. He doesn't have community, and he can't get out of it. But he's also not helping himself.
Well, that's because I was going to bring up he's given an opportunity.
Yeah, but what I mean is like he blames the world for his position, and so he treats the world in such a way as a result, and he doesn't give any ownership to the fact that he's adding to his own problem.
I think there comes a realization of that, but I think that's kind of the plot of the second half is exploring that question there.
Yeah, but like it's in that way that it enters your head, but you don't act on it. You don't take it for any. It's just a passing thought. Oh, maybe I'm doing something that's maybe I'm treating people horribly. No. That he's he knows he's in a bad situation. There's a cognitive dissonance.
Interesting, because I don't know if I'd actually agree with that. That's interesting.
Yeah.
I'm gonna have to reread it now. What have you condemned me to?
So
Maybe we'll both have to reread it.
as someone who hasn't actually read the book, but I do know a bit about it, how easy of a read is it? Could someone pick it up off a shelf and dive straight into it? Or is it going to be one of those books that requires like full attention and for them to reflect on like chapters as they finish them?
Translation matters a lot, especially with any Dostoevsky book.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had to actually, when I was reading through Crime and Punishment, I had to switch translators because I found the one guy was just too, I think it was just too word for word on the Russian, or maybe it was an older translation, so it wasn't quite as up to date on some of the terminology. But
It's either a husband and wife or a brother and sister. Yeah.
It is husband and wife. They're great.
Yeah.
And they do the series through, is it Basic Books? Is that what it's called?
I know Basic Books is a series. I don't know.
It's a
Yeah,
publisher.
I think
It's
our
not
publisher
Basic Books, I
is.
don't think. It's
Something else. Okay,
Well,
sorry.
then, in terms of the book, what would you guys give it out of 5? 5 Halos, 1 5.
It's 5 for me. It was just so good. It.
Okay.
I was thinking about
It's
how
in my
it.
now I need to read it book category.
I suppose. I mean, it really depends on the kind of person you are too. If you can take those ideas and kind of flesh them out, especially with friends.
Yeah.
Because I immediately messaged both Josh and Caleb as soon as I had like the ability to talk about the book. So
yeah, I'd give it a 4.5 just because I like to say 5 out of 5 books should be read by everyone.
Oh yeah,
That's
we've talked about this. Yeah.
Which might be like my weird rating system, but yeah, it's great. Hard.
Yeshua.
The husband and wife that did the translation that do translations for all of Dostoevsky's work into English that are really good is Richard Peviar and Larissa Volokonsky.
and what's the publisher on that one?
Is it on the spine?
Vintage Classics.
Vintage Classics. Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
So,
But Josh, out of 5.
I mean, I like the cover.
Okay, I was going to ask the cover question next.
Oh, out of 5, 3.5. It doesn't grow on me the same way that his other books do. His other books, like Crime and Punishment and Brothers Karamazov, they get better the further away you get from the book, having read it.
Right.
Because it requires long time of reflection, and for moments like in the book to happen in your life for you to go, I see that.
The thing is what you're saying there, where it's like, I see that in me. I get that from that book, though.
I see him in other people.
I see him in me.
Yeah. I mean, I see Raskolnikov in me, but
Really?
yeah.
We'll have to come back to that when we talk about Crime and Punishment.
Yeah.
Have you read The Idiot?
That's
I
the
see
next
him
one
in
I'm
me.
reading. No, The Idiot I'm reading next, and then it's Demons, or The Possessed.
Yeah, depending which
Yeah.
publisher and translation. But that's enough about books.
And then the cover is 4.
No, you're not allowed to answer that. I was going to give
It's
it
a translation, though, so they can put whatever cover they want on it. I really like the ones that they do for their translations, but I've seen some pretty terrible covers of Crime and Punishment.
Oh yeah.
They just look terrible.
2. I want to get into it. Josh, I cannot fathom why you'd pick a 4 for that cover.
Yeah, no, it's inconsistent. though.
2.
People will look it
Hard
up.
2 for me.
People will look it up, and then it's fine.
Yeah.
I like that one because it's minimalistic. That's all I like about it.
It's black and white.
I'm saying the design is minimalistic. The color is not so much what makes it minimalistic.
It's colorblind, so he likes the.
That's true. I forgot. Yeah. Dude, that's red and green.
Well, no,
I don't
and
know
it
what you're
looks
talking
like
about.
and it looks like the map of an underground.
I
Like from a video game, maybe.
Yeah.
Anyway.
I'm not wrong.
I
does not
just,
have it.
I think you just see things.
Hey, Caleb,
Yeah,
what are we talking about today?
dude, we get to continue our series through Samuel.
Awesome.
I know it is awesome. This time we're gonna go through First Samuel 12. So for those who are catching up, we've gone through the story of Samuel's parents and that family in comparison to Eli and his family. and how this is in our first few episodes covering through it, how disobedience and blessing and how God works in different families based on their obedience goes through there. Then there's a little escapade where the Ark goes on a journey, a little side quest. That one's fun. I think that one's coming out.
I can't wait for that to come out. It comes out tomorrow, actually. To date this episode pretty badly.
That's okay. I don't think it really matters. Yeah, and then we go through the rise of Saul, and so we that's been awesome. The rise of Saul. Yeah, and so far it's been pretty good for Saul. We talked actually. Josh and I talked about how Saul's kind of passive throughout quite a lot of the beginning, where things just happen to him, and he's like, "Oh, okay."
He's the barrel boy.
However, just before this, they have he goes out, he gathers the people, they assemble into an army of one man.
And they fight Satan.
Yeah, which we covered in our last episode, which was awesome.
They fight Satan?
Yeah, the leader of the Ammonites is named Nachash, which is just the word serpent.
Straight up.
In Genesis 3.
Oh.
And he fights him in the dry, rocky place, a wilderness. Mm-hmm. And there's a promise of if you surrender, you can follow me.
Oh, so they're in Eden. Okay, I get it.
He's a sneaky.
It's also Jesus in the wilderness. But anyway,
Yeah,
that
no,
episode's cool. You should, if you haven't listened to that, do that already. Now, so in chapter 11, there was a little bit of like the people coronating the king, right? Like this is Saul has saved us. God has saved us through Saul. And they articulate it properly. However, chapter 12 is more so through Samuel. God, let's say, putting the final touches on this is kingship that you asked for. A couple commentators articulate it almost in a legal case setting.
Yeah.
But yeah, so heavy kingship themes, which is all throughout Samuel.
Of course.
And chapter 12 also is it's a lone chapter, whereas all the other chapters that we talked about have like pairings or comparisons, right? Like the families, the sons, Eli's sons and Samuel's. And now we're getting like this lone chapter of just Samuel in between Saul's kingship. And this is like a jumping off point of how's he going to turn out? Because he's been good up to this point and he's being made king. And it's just like, is he going to go the right way or is he going to go the bad way? Because it's kind of displays two options. Kings will be bad or kings will be good. Yeah. And it's which one is he going to be?
Well, it appears to be like a proper checkpoint in the development of Israel's history.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And people will make literary comments on why the book is structured in such a way.
Well, yeah, because it heavily relates to the pro-monarchy sect of Judaism that's rising up. And that, I guess you could say Judaism, but more like the religious leaders and political leaders. Yeah. Well, I mean, a lot of people have things to say about how Samuel was structured, pro-monarchy versus anti-monarchy. Part of the reason why the Ark story kind of just like is shoved in there with nothing surrounding it that really explains why it's there is similar to why chapter 12 would be standing by itself.
Because it's fairly anti-monarchy. Maybe not anti. Like as in the monarchy.
Yeah.
Well, it's not monarchy in of itself is bad.
Well, the argument would be that
sure.
Yeah.
a king, a lot of would say King Josiah, would place this in as a retroactive justification for why there were kings in the first place, trying to justify his family line.
But he
and
wouldn't
part of the reason why this would be partially anti-monarchy would be because he wasn't of Saul's line. He's of David's line.
Right.
So he's fine to discredit Saul and actually justify David's rise.
But the focus
But seeing
of
it as all political is also not the right hermeneutic.
Yeah,
So.
because chapter 12 is predominantly focused more on the spiritual health of the nation as a whole. That's the main thing. It's not focused on Saul and his failure or success, because up to this point he's been passive, and then successful.
Yeah, it's not that kingship is bad. It's that kingship on people's terms is bad.
Yeah.
That it's because God is going to bring a king There's laws for it, but it's that they wanted a king before God gave them one, and specifically reject God, as he mentions multiple times.
Yep.
Yeah, they haven't rejected you, Samuel. They've rejected me.
And it is, as we'll see in this, it's framed as asking for a king is in and of itself an evil act.
Yes.
At least in the context of how it happened with Samuel.
Yeah.
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 So because we're doing like a verse by verse,
Kind of. More
Yeah.
like chunk of scripture by chunk of scripture.
previous sections we've been doing chapter like sandboxes to talk in, but now we're doing verse like sections of verses. Do you just want me to read a bunch of verses 1 through 5?
Sure. If you want to do 1 through 5.
Yep. Okay. And Samuel said to all people, "Behold, I have obeyed your voice in all that you have said to me, and have made a king over you. And now behold, the king walks before you, and I am old and gray. And behold, my sons are with you, and I have walked before you from my youth until this day. Here I am. Testify against me before the Lord and before his anointed. Whose ox have I taken? Or whose donkey have I taken? Or whom have I defrauded? Whom have I oppressed? Or from whose hand have I taken a bribe to blind my eyes with it? Testify against me, and I will restore it to you." They said, You have not defrauded us or oppressed us or taken anything from any man's hand. And he said to them, "The Lord is witness against you, and his anointed is witness this day, that you have not found anything in my hand." And they said, "He is witness."
And so that's you can kind of see the court kind of legal proceeding almost kind of building up. Samuel gathers everybody, but then he establishes his innocence, which is interesting because this is going to get further back. But before we get kind of right into there, if we're going to try to establish when this was in Samuel's time, because apparently a lot of older commentators and whatnot would say this is part of this is Samuel's farewell speech that we see in like Joshua and in Deuteronomy and whatnot.
Feel similar to
It does feel similar, but in those previous farewell speeches, they die immediately after.
Yeah.
Samuel doesn't.
Yeah.
His sons, it mentions like, yeah, he's old. He's old. Also, a certain thing of note, his sons mentioned here, they're brought up in a neutral term. Whereas previously in chapter 8, his sons are listed as like, hey, they're not doing good. They're bad. Give us a king. And so it's not.
Yeah, that Samuel's sons are evil as well.
Yeah, and so some people say that that's evidence of two different sources being brought together.
Right.
It seems a bit presumptuous, and most, at least the two commentators that I've read on this, which are Victor Hamilton and Ralph Klein, they kind of go, it's a bit presumptuous to just say it's his farewell speech. It's a late life speech, maybe retirement speech, as I am the face of the leadership team, let's say. However, because it ends with I'll continue to teach and pray, but he's not the judge anymore.
It does feel a bit like a passing of the torch, kind of thing.
But to say farewell speech might be a bit much.
Well, that gets into a interesting. So there was another thing that happened within ancient Near East kingship transitions, which was the new king would put all the blame of the current situation on the previous administration.
That's not an ancient Near East phenomenon.
I know, but it is. But it happens now passively. Like our government does that. They always blame the last prime minister or the last president.
Dude, it happens in my work.
Yeah. But it was like an official thing that they like purposely did and then would go after them legally. And so this is one Walton that I was reading was saying that this is Samuel covering his bases. Because if the king turns out poorly, as he mentioned previously in the book, that kings can go bad. Kings can go horrible. You don't want it to go horrible. And so he's covering his bases legally by getting the people, God, and the king to all admit in a group that he did nothing wrong.
Well, it's also so there's two interesting things that like wordplay stuff, not wordplay in itself, but like indicated by the words that might be missed easily in English. There's the whole thing of the taking of donkeys. The verbiage is the same, and clearly that he's saying like in chapter 8 when he's like, hey, you don't understand. The king is going to do this. He's going to take your livestock. He's going to take your donkeys. He's going to take this. He's going to do this. So there's a little bit of like, hey, I didn't do any of that, did I? There's also a thing with like he hasn't taken a bribe.
His sons did.
But his sons did, yeah. There's also actually in that little sidetrack, the comment on taking a bribe, not only is it, at least this is where Klein goes, not only the verbiage there is like not only when he takes a bribe or if someone offers a bribe and he accepts it, would that pervert his eyes to see justice in the moment, but that would corrupt his eyes to see justice in general.
Which it might be why Eli was blind. And then also what's interesting is Samuel knew where Saul's donkeys were.
There's a little bit of something there. It's just
when they
funny.
disappeared.
When he ran after him.
Yeah.
Or his dad's donkeys.
Yeah.
Are you saying Samuel kidnaps his donkeys?
No, but I think he's telling everybody that may have heard about the story that he didn't steal Saul's dad's donkeys.
That is interesting. He's like, hey, they're going to come for your livestock. And what does he come looking for? He comes looking for his livestock. Right? It's
So that's one thing. There's also when Samuel goes, I've walked with you. Who can like bring a charge against me essentially. And then when he brings up the king walks among us, but he uses two different words. One, and some commentators argue which way, but I think the most intuitive way to see that is one is to say, I've walked like you've seen. Yeah. I have walked in this idea of like, I've been tested. You've seen my integrity, right? And then the other one is like, he's before us walking right now, untested. And that's one of the comparison thing. That was the answer that I found most compelling.
Could you explain that a little more thoroughly? I don't fully understand.
I can try.
What you mean.
It's from Klein. Is it? Yeah, Klein. I don't want to mispronounce his last name.
That's the Word Biblical Commentary, isn't
Word
it?
Biblical Commentary, yeah.
They're super in depth, I find.
Yeah, I like them. They're good.
Yeah.
The idea would be that there's two Hebrew words used. One for when Samuel has walked with them, past tense. Yeah. And then Saul is currently walking among them, right? And one is this: you've seen that I have been tried and tested, and found as though my integrity has been shown. Right. Yeah. And the other, perhaps simply by contrasting, the thing lacking in the word used for Saul is just, but you haven't seen him walk and past tense tested.
I've walked among you. He is only walking among you.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah.
I've been here the whole time. He's just passing through. Okay. I think I understand. Well, and the argument is only from contrast. It's not that there's something explicitly being said there.
Yeah. No, it's not. It's not the Hebrew in of itself.
No. because the root word for both is halach.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's not the Hebrew itself. Don't mean those. It's just the
comparison. And
contrast. The intentional phrasing kind of might indicate that. Yeah. There's other theories that some commentators have used, but I liked Klein's. It was the most intuitive.
Now look, this king walks before you. I have walked before you. I have walked before you from the time of my youth until the present day.
Yeah. Fair enough.
Yeah. So, actually, we've brought up other times. I don't know if we've ever brought it up in the podcast, but I know we've brought it up when we're just talking to one another. You know how Joseph and Daniel are the only ones that are like, but they never had like a character failing moment. Not like explicitly. Does Samuel ever have a character like failing moment where he falters a little bit, or?
I don't.
Because most characters in the Bible have some sort of their test and they're found lacking.
What's his sons?
I was going to say the same
It's
thing.
just his sons.
He's a bad father.
Would you think that the comparison with that to Eli and how that's one of Eli's great sins would be not necessarily the same thing of like, oh, Eli was pretty bad by the time he died, because of his son, because of how he acted towards his sons. This one is showing that kind of similar kind of path, is showing that he wasn't a great father.
I don't think so. I don't think so. I think it's presumptuous.
Well, and there's also he has a knowledge of his sons being evil in a sense, or they're being.
And there is in making a king, he's kind of acknowledging that his sons are bad and doing something about it.
Yeah.
He's
Unlike
obeying
Eli.
God.
Yeah.
The Lord, the Spirit speaks through him still. It didn't speak through Eli. As mentioned, that the Spirit hadn't spoken in a while. The word had not come.
Yep.
And Samuel, in his description, is old and gray, not fat and blind.
Associated with wisdom rather than gluttony.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So yeah, I maybe the sons thing, but although I can't think of one.
The sons thing is definitely leading to the fact that he put more work in. He put less work into his family than he should have.
I see, maybe, but I don't know if that's reading into it.
Maybe.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I mean, it's not quite perfect judges. Him being a judge doesn't make him perfect, is what I'm saying.
Exactly.
Right? Like so many of them screwed up their families entirely.
Yeah. And
I just don't know if there's a theological or an in-depth reading to his sons being disobedient. Aside from that's what the sons of good men do.
True.
Is take what has been built up for granted, and you'll see that immediately with David and Absalom. But still,
oh yeah, it is a super rare thing in history to find a great man with great sons.
yeah.
I
Well,
only
even Cyrus the Great. It's a whole thing.
I only bring that up because it's a funny thing when there's a character in the Bible that's presented as faithful throughout the entire time that they're spoken of in the text, or at least one that doesn't like struggle with and like the whole have some sort of faltering moment where God's like, okay, come on.
Yeah. Well, and there might be. Yep, that's it. That's all I got.
It might,
There might be, maybe.
despite us calling the book Samuel, it might be because the focus of this text just isn't really that much about Samuel. Samuel being somewhat perfect, at least as it shows here, actually aids to how he is the messenger from God. So when David is crowned, it does seem more legitimate than if he was sinful. Do you think that would be part of it?
I mean, kind of, but I mean, it's not like that sinful. It's not like sinful people or people that have sin are shied away from in the Bible. It's everywhere.
Right.
Right. So I think if it's how many other prophets have the moment where it's just like, oh, like what's why can't I think of his name? Like, oh no.
What did he do?
The prophet that like goes and lies on his, that goes into the desert and cries, and God's like, "Hey,
Elijah?
man, I got it." Yeah, it's Elijah. Sorry, but then,
Takes a nap, eats some bread.
yeah, and it's just like, dude, sleep, eat, like,
Have a
come
nap.
on,
Feel better.
It's fine.
Have a nappy, have a snacky.
Calm
Can you
down.
imagine being so sad there has to be divine intervention?
but that's what I mean, right? Like, there's some sort of weird faltering moment. It's just like, oh, well, come on, man.
Actually, now that I say that, I feel like it's a little more relatable than I
was gonna
originally
say,
thought.
yeah.
It's like, no.
Well, I think God. There was a funny meme, but it's a the story of Elijah shows you never underestimate the spiritual power of a snack. Snack and a nap.
Yeah.
But
Anyway, so that's a sidebar. Sorry.
Samuel's a good guy. Now, here's the other thing. We mentioned if this is his farewell speech, why isn't he dead? Right? Why doesn't he die soon after this? And it's because I think in the prophecy of Samuel in chapter 1 that he would attend God's anointed. David's not here yet.
Sure, but why thematically have this here? This at least seeming comparison to the farewell.
Because the fact that he doesn't die in the next chapter or immediately after tells you something about that's going to happen. Because of the pattern that's been presented, farewell speech, die, farewell speech, die, farewell speech, die, farewell speech doesn't die. What?
Maybe
Makes you pay attention. And
I'm just not sure if it's a farewell speech.
No, you're right. But what I mean is that the fact that it's even describing that he's getting old and gray and he's retiring of a sort. He's transitioning.
He retires of one of his positions.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It seems like judge over Israel is the position he's retired.
Yeah,
from.
but at the end, I will still pray and teach. I will pray for you and teach you.
Which makes him a
So he's
prophet in the council rather than sorry, my voice is going. But rather than just a judge, he is now.
Which means he expects to continue to minister somehow.
Should we read verses 6 to 11?
Sure. Yeah, we
Do you
spent a
want
lot
to
of
do that?
time on 5
Yeah, I'll do
verses.
it.
Shoot.
And Samuel said to the people, "The Lord is witness, who appointed Moses and Aaron and brought your fathers up out of the land of Egypt. Now therefore stand still, that I may plead with you before the Lord concerning all the righteous deeds of the Lord that he performed for you and for your fathers. When Jacob went into Egypt and the Egyptians oppressed them, then your fathers cried out to the Lord, and the Lord sent Moses and Aaron, who brought your fathers out of Egypt and made them dwell in the land. But they forgot the Lord your God, and he sold them into the hands of Sisera, commander of the army of Hazor, and into the land of the Philistines, and into the hand of the king of Moab, and they fought against them. And they cried out to the Lord and said, We have sinned, because we have forsaken the Lord, and have served the Baals and the Ashtoreths. But now deliver us out of the hand of our enemies, that we may serve you. And the Lord sent Jerubbaal and Barak and Jephthah and Samuel, and delivered you out of the hand of your enemies on every side, and you lived in safety."
I find it funny that it puts his name in there, but yeah.
Mm-hmm. In the third person.
Yep.
Not just me. He said Samuel, me.
Is this the first time we talk about the Baal and Asherah being worshipped in Israel?
No.
Or is it?
mentioned
It's
in
earlier.
Judges, I
It's
think.
mentioned in Judges. Okay, I thought so.
Judges and in the command of Saul is to fight off the Philistines and remove basically the command of the king is to remove the foreign gods, stuff like that. And they mention Baal and Asherah.
But it goes through the Judges cycle that we talked about a little bit before. They forget God or whatnot. They sin against. They forget to keep the commandments of God, and then they get oppressed.
Yeah.
They recognize their sin. They call out. God sends a deliverer. He delivers them.
It goes all the way back to Jacob.
Yeah.
Yep. The beginning of Israel.
You pointed out something.
Yeah. So it wasn't me, it was Walton again, who said he said that this total period covers between 800 to 850 years.
Yeah.
That Samuel summarizes into 5 verses, right? To talk about their sin, about how horrible they are. And he mentioned that that's like today, if somebody gave a speech about how horrible Christianity was and spanned the history from the Crusades till now with 100 words or less and said, look how horrible Christianity is. Like it's technically a bad faith, like description of the whole of a nation,
Not when it comes to the
but not when it
Israel.
comes to the,
Well, I think a little bit too. He does just go through Judges.
and he's not highlighting like, hey, you're always evil. He's highlighting that there is a pattern that we keep committing.
Monkey sees pattern.
Yeah, which is we get into a situation where life sucks and we're being oppressed and we cry out to God. And then when he frees us, we treat him horribly. And we don't deserve this. We don't deserve this salvation. We don't deserve this freedom that is brought by our God. But yet he chooses to do this every single time. And it just keeps adding to how horrible we are. Because we keep doing it. And all the good things he's done keep stacking up. And the weight of our sin just keeps stacking up against it.
I mean, if you were doing a biblical theology on God's hesed, his loving kindness, his willingness to uphold the covenant even when they don't, this would be your text from Samuel. This would be a big text in Samuel.
Yeah.
Well, my favorite part of this text is you've done all this horrible, but this is actually an account of all the good that God has done to you.
in contrast, directly contrasting the both.
That's what it opens with. And yeah, like we said, it's very telling of the state of the nature of their relationship.
Yeah. And it's their defining relationship with God.
Mm-hmm.
They sin. Like we joked about, it might not be on the recording, but we joked about it at the beginning here about how the only thing I contribute to my salvation is my sin.
Yeah.
It's disappointment.
Yeah. And it's true. Like we like to get away from like us, but like, yes, we do the same thing Israel does.
Mm-hmm.
We do just keep sinning and God keeps forgiving and rescuing. But
It also seems that this push and pull, this forgetting and remembering, and my computer just died, so we're gonna have to go off the cuff here and not do the notes. But this push and pull is actually setting up the standards by which the kings will be deemed righteous and unrighteous kings.
Mm-hmm.
That there's a strong like, hey, here's the terms and conditions. They've been set out from before judges, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like now they don't do what's right in their own eyes; they do what's right in the eyes of the king. And whether that be extinguishing the Baals and the Asherahs, or that's returning to right worship, I don't know if the king's got the rudder to the ship in this part of the episode. So
Yeah. There's a book that I own that I wanted to specifically look for this passage, and read its section on it. The Old Testament's use of the Old Testament.
yeah,
Which seems a little redundant. However, this has a bunch of phraseology, obviously borrowed from Deuteronomy.
yep.
And it would
makes
be a
sense.
perfect book to. And then I went out to go study this and forgot it. And then I forgot to grab it again. And then I forgot to grab it even today. So
thank you for telling us.
So
that you have
just
nothing to say.
Just so you know, there is tons. If you pick up a commentary, you'll see a bunch of like, hey, see Deuteronomy this. Hey, see Deuteronomy that. Hey, see
It is a
Deuteronomy
fascinating
this.
book.
Yeah. But it's so heavily influenced by what Joel was pointing out there. Is like, hey, it's all these terms and conditions about kingship and how it relates to the people and all that kind of stuff. That's been set out in Deuteronomy. And even the text in its, references and whether that's explicit or implicit, it knows what it's doing.
yeah.
Yeah, and you'll see that again in Josiah's reign, which is a pivotal moment as far as like kingship goes, where he refers to the second law, and that's again tying it all back together. It's like these were the rules; we always knew it.
Yep.
Return to right worship. So,
There's an interesting this will be seen later, but there's a Israel is rejecting God. That's been God's statement. And so by Samuel giving this summary, he's also telling Israel, you're doing it again. This act of crowning the king right now is you rejecting God.
It's part of this pattern.
And that gets into immediately. That's his whole point in the next section.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we'll get into the next section. It is a mix of that and what Joel said about how it's, yes, you have sinned, and I'm going to show you how this is also a sin. But also going forward, it's in your hands. Good luck. That kind of thing.
Yeah. But if it's also about God's rescuing of his people, there's something else beyond, like we mentioned. It's not just that Israel keeps rejecting God, right? It's the king is also God to the people, like as his representative.
Yeah.
Right? Because to this point, God has been king. God has been the one that fights with the army to protect Israel. God is the one that's been the one that the people look to for order and stability, unfaithfully. And so now that's on the king, and we'll get into like divine kingship in a bit, but like, so not only is the part of the speech where this is them rejecting God, the king is also God rescuing his people. It's both things put together.
Well, and I think you see that somewhat put in a literary way, because you have in chapter 7, you have under Samuel's leadership, and him interceding for them, the Israelites are saved from. I think it's the Philistines in that time.
Yeah.
And then it happens with Saul in chapter 11 with the Ammonites. And so I think it's presented in both ways, but one is clearly
And in how God talks to Saul versus how he talks to the people. To the people, he says, by demanding a king, you're rejecting me, right? But then when he talks to Saul, he says, hey, to be king, you now have to get the army together. You have to fight off the Philistines and their enemies. You have to get rid of the gods, and you have to get the people to worship me, right? So he's like, he's playing both sides of the thing. This is rejection and this is bad. Hey, Saul, you're now me to these people.
Yep.
So you got to behave like me. You got to do the things that I've done. When they cry out, you got to rescue them.
Well, Samuel's in the next segment is very explicit over how
and you see
the
that
relationship works.
Yeah, you see that theology heavily on display through several psalms.
Yeah.
The kind of kingship adoption type psalms that people will argue about, but
Even the relationship of the Holy Spirit to the individual as a means of kingship. Through David's Psalms, you see a lot of that, but not so much with Saul. I can't think of any Psalms that have Saul as the stand-in.
But it's the position that idea is.
Well, just that kingship is heavily associated with the anointing or the Holy Spirit resting upon them.
Yeah, but also being the intermediary between God and his people and the people and God.
Yep. Should I read verses 12 to 15?
Man, you just want to read them all?
Yeah.
Got to catch them all?
Yeah, exactly. And when you saw that Nahash, the king of the Ammonites, come against you, you said to me, no, but a king shall reign over us. And when the Lord your God was your king, and now behold, the king whom you have chosen, for whom you have asked, behold, the Lord has set a king over you. If you will fear the Lord and serve him and obey his voice and not rebel against the commandment of the Lord, and if both you and the king who reigns over you will follow the Lord your God, it will be well. But if you will not obey the voice of the Lord, but rebel against the commandments of the Lord, then the hand of the Lord will be against you and your king. Yep.
It's like there's a clear acknowledgement of, hey, what you're doing is bad, but I'm going to make it work.
Yep. We can make this work. You won't, but we can make this work. It's almost like in Deuteronomy when
It is very reminiscent of Deuteronomy.
when Moses is like, hey, you're going to fall away. You're going to worship other gods. They're just explicitly like, you're going to do bad. And God's going to throw you into exile and blah, 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 blah. But don't worry.
Well, it is also very reminiscent of Deuteronomy in the way of, if you follow me, follow the king, worship me, worship the king, worship the king. Well, don't do that one. But the king as the representative, you and the king do this.
Yep.
Then you'll be good. If you don't, the hand of the Lord will be against you, which is the same sort of wording that you see in, like I said, Deuteronomy.
I do find it
Very
interesting that,
covenantal.
by their demand, they do introduce that there's this like, but what happens if the people are good and the king are bad? Well, too bad.
Yeah, and I mean, I think the modern moral of 1 Samuel, even as a whole, but specifically in this passage, is that God executes his will. God executes his perfect will through imperfect means, right? He allows his will to be done by those who do not really have the capacity to carry it out. And it's only by his divine orchestra that he's able to make all things harmonize and work together.
And he proves that in the last episode we did on Saul's rise, when we joked at the beginning of this episode about how Saul's just kind of there and all this stuff, he's just kind of like on rails and God just does everything. And that's the way it should be. Yeah. Is like you're saying, Saul doesn't do all the things that make him king. When he fights Nahash, the spirit rushes upon him and he gets angry and fights for the people.
Yep.
Right? Saul he's just looking for his dad's donkeys and suddenly arrives next to Samuel, and Samuel's like, "Hey, you're the king," pours oil on his head and kisses him on the forehead.
Go home.
Yeah, go home. Hey, you're going to meet this guy, and this guy. Do what I say. You'll be crowned king. He does them. Doesn't say a single word. And he just kind of goes, and God does all these things around him in the exact same way that the ark just goes around and defeats the Philistines.
And David follows a similar
Yeah.
sort of pattern of being unremarkable.
Yeah.
David?
David starts off as unremarkable and
But he starts off as remarkable. He's killed lions and wolves and bears. I think lions and bears is what I think it actually says.
yeah, but he wasn't chosen to be king because of his actions or even his looks. Although he does end up being fairly good looking and fairly strong, it's not why he's chosen to be king.
I know what you're saying. Like
Right.
it's the people chose Saul because they saw him as what a king looked like.
Yeah.
They didn't see David as that, like Samuel himself does when he goes through the brothers and he's like,
David's not even an option.
yeah,
Like at first,
yeah,
it's not. It's only God and Samuel who make David the option to become king.
yeah. But I mean, like Samuel's even like, is there another? Like,
Yeah.
he for sure thought it was going to be the oldest brother.
Yep.
Yeah.
But in that way, yes. But then when God reveals who David is to Samuel, you see that he's a man of character. He's a shepherd. He has what God knows it takes to be a king.
Right.
And so in that way, like in the people's eyes, he's seen as unremarkable.
Yeah. Yes.
But in God's eyes,
He's the shepherd, and being not even present was the unremarkable part.
Oh, yeah. And Christ calling back the imagery of the Good Shepherd as well is no small Davidic lineage thing. Right?
Yeah.
Like the archetypical.
Like when Isaiah goes
Good
into, he's
shepherd.
not a man to look at, but then, but Jesus is actually the greatest human being to ever exist. Like that mix of like, what do we mean by like, he's not remarkable and he's actually remarkable. In the people's eyes, he's unremarkable, but in reality, he is.
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, obviously that's connected in the Psalms. That's the string that ties them all together. But why are we talking about David?
We were making a comparison of how passive Saul
Completely
is
on me.
In God bringing about his purposes through people's sin. Or should we say in spite of people's sin? Might be a better way to say
Yes.
it.
In the midst of
might be a better way. I actually don't know.
in the midst of
That's
people's
something
sin.
that I personally am weirded out about. But anyway,
Well, it goes back into that idea that we've talked about and copious amounts of times, which is that it's God that rescues Israel. It's not the king. Like it's God that rescued Israel, not the ark.
Yeah.
It's God that led Israel to this place. It wasn't Moses.
well, it's God that rescues the ark, not the people.
Yeah.
They don't go in and rescue it. They've lost it.
Yeah. The whole thing is just people like Saul just standing around and God doing everything. And then the people going, why aren't you doing anything? And he's like, I'm doing everything.
Just recognize your covenant.
Yeah.
Worship me. Don't. Yeah.
And he's happy to do it. He promised he would.
But he's also a just God,
Yeah.
and there are consequences.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He's faithful. We are unfaithful.
I feel like we're just doing Old Testament theology right now.
It feels like we're getting wider and wider as we.
I think Samuel 12 just does that to people when they read it.
It's very archetypical.
You remember when we were talking about it last episode, right? Our last series, our last episode in this series, at least. And it was just like, hey, can we just do chapter 12 by itself? And you're like, I don't know. And it's like, it's so good though by
So
itself.
much, yeah.
Well, no, it's because like I was wondering if there was something else going on with like chapter 13 and 14, if it would relate. And it doesn't at all. So
Fair enough.
So yeah, this is like the branch off point that I mentioned at the beginning of the episode of this is where it's going to go for Saul. Is it going to be good? Is it going to be bad? Is he going to be the good king? Is he going to continue with obeying, or is he going to go bad? But But the next section, is 16 to 25.
Have we started doing previews on the podcast as I've begun, or what?
No, I think it was just because like we're reading such like a short section, and like it gets for like the audience, it helps them understand what we're talking about.
Yeah.
Otherwise, we're just talking about it at like you know.
Last
Oh,
episode,
absolutely.
we were just super excited about like, oh, this ties into this, and then this goes into this, and you can see how these things relate. And oh, look at the next chapter; it's going to talk about this.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, when you talk about a larger section, you can't read the entire chapter. you know?
Exactly. Shall I read the remainder?
You've done this far.
Okay.
Might as well.
It'd be super weird not to.
Yeah. Thank you, Joel.
Yeah.
Now, therefore, stand still and see this great thing that the Lord will do before your eyes. Is it not wheat harvest today? I will call upon the Lord, and he may send thunder and rain, and you shall know and see that your wickedness is great, which you have done in the sight of the Lord, in making you for yourselves a king. So Samuel called upon the Lord, and the Lord sent thunder and rain that day, and all the people greatly feared the Lord and Samuel. And all the people said to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God, that we may not die. For we have added to all our sins this evil, to ask for ourselves a king. And Samuel said to the people, do not be afraid. You have done all this evil, yet do not turn aside from following the Lord, but serve the Lord with all your heart. And do not turn aside from after empty things that cannot profit or deliver, for they are empty. For the Lord will not forsake his people for his great name's sake, because it has pleased the Lord to make you a people for himself. Moreover, as for me, far be it from me that I should sin against the Lord by ceasing to pray for you. I will instruct you in the good and the right way. Only fear the Lord and serve him faithfully and with all your heart, for consider what great things he has done for you. But if you still do wickedly, you shall be swept away, both you and your king.
So many themes reiterated, right?
Yeah.
The covenant kind of contract thing going on, right? One of the super cool things, at least I think, do you guys know the Baal cycle stuff? Just because Baal was mentioned earlier.
Of course I know the ball cycle stuff.
But does the audience know the ball cycle stuff?
Probably not. It's not that important.
What are you talking about? It actually is here.
Yeah.
A little bit, right?
And so is the Marduk Tiamat cycle. Anyways.
So part of the Baal cycle, whatever, it's part of their mythology. Their mythology is reflected, I shouldn't say those who worshipped the pantheon of Baal and El and all that. El is like
Ugaritic deity.
Yeah, and multiple cultures blurred together in there. But Baal is one of the storm gods, or the storm god, and his death and resurrection, quote unquote, if you want to go that way. Whatever. We won't get into that. His myth in their their mythology and their pantheon is heavily tied to the rain cycle. Right? And so it's the dry season. Baal is dead. That's part of the whole idea, is when there's no rain, Baal is dead. And the idea is that God makes it rain when Baal is dead is just awesome.
But it's also, there's another fun thing happening, continuing with that idea. So in the Baal cycle, he's fighting the sea god, the saltwater god, Yam. And it's a marker of being the head of the pantheon is taming the sea. And so Baal defeats Yam, and blah, 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 is seen as the greatest of the gods as a result. But it's this constant refighting. In the Babylonian story, the Enuma Elish, Marduk does the same thing in defeating Tiamat, the great sea, and defeats it. And the great sea in both these stories is representative of chaos. Israel is in chaos by rejecting their God. And in this act of raining during the dry season and causing them all to have fear of him, he is taming their chaos, their sin, their evil.
If you really wanted to start stretching things, just being like, definitely inferring things onto the text, which you shouldn't do. But if you wanted to, then you could go like the whole, he's taming their chaos by using rain, which is water in of itself, which is part of chaos. Thus, he's bringing about the solution to their in an analogous way, he's bringing about the solution to their leadership problem and their sin by still using the thing that they want, which is a king, which is part of their sin.
Yeah.
I think that's inferring upon the text. It's just,
It's poetic, but it's not poetry.
Yeah,
right. It's one of those
it's
things.
not there, but it would be cool if
This
it
is
was.
kind of the book that doesn't have poetry, unless you count Hannah's song or Hannah's prayer. I don't know. It's all over the place when you least expect it.
There is an interesting thing that I wanted to point out is in verse 19, they say to Samuel, pray for your servants to the Lord your God,
Yeah.
not our God.
So this is like a little bit of theocracy just thrown in there.
It's rejection.
Yeah. They acknowledge that
It's an acknowledgement of the rejection. He's not our God.
Yeah.
because you'll
And
see
that's
that
super sad.
you'll see the verbiage shift with Saul later.
Yeah.
Because at some points earlier on, he'll say "our" or "my" or normally "our," but then sometimes there'll be a shift, and it'll be normally it's associated with disobedience.
Yeah.
Your God, the Lord, your God.
Yeah. And it's
Or just general apostasy.
Yeah.
Right? Like you'll hear it from the wives of Saul or Solomon, I think. Pray
Yeah.
to your God.
Yeah.
yeah.
Or
Yeah, but it's a physical acknowledgement of what Samuel just said.
yeah.
You're rejecting the king, your God, to have a king of your own choosing. And now the people are acknowledging that, yeah, he's not our king. He's not our God.
Is 1 Samuel 12 just half of Old Testament theology?
It's definitely a summary of it.
So he does the rain thing. He basically calls out Israel for doing this, for rejecting him, but also so for the audience, part of the reason why this is bad is because if it's harvest time and it rains, and when it rains in the Middle East, it rains hard, it can damage the harvest.
Yeah.
And so it's bad for the winter if all the food gets destroyed.
Well, it's bad for the people in the winter.
Yeah.
Starvation.
It's also a confirmation of the curses in Deuteronomy that the crops would fail, that God wouldn't let the crops succeed because they're disobedience. And so the moment they crown the king, God's like, next level. Like, because it's the whole of the curses of Deuteronomy are like, and if you continue to sin, this will happen. And if you continue to sin, this will happen. And by them crowning the king, God's like, you went up a level. More curse. But there's hope. Caleb, what's the hope?
The hope is that they're like, Samuel, pray for us. This is not good. And he's like, hey, God's not going to destroy you. It's okay. It's not going to kill you for this. Might damage the crops, but he's not going to kill you for this. And so there's mercy even in that, which is awesome.
And it is a bit of a just a show of power. Like God is God, and I am His representative.
Yeah.
But it's I don't know. The more and more I'm thinking about it, the more and more I'm just seeing, this is like so much of this is just Old Testament theology encapsulated along with so much like biblical theology of God's loving kindness and commitment to the covenant that he made with Abraham, regardless of them actually upholding the covenant that they made with Moses.
There's also another connection to Cain here with Saul, because Cain has that whole conversation with God about where God comes to him and he says, hey, yes, you sinned, but sin is crouching at your door. Don't continue down that path.
Yeah.
Don't keep on sinning. This is a moment for you to turn around, repent, so to speak, the 180. You don't have to continue doing what you're doing. You can worship properly. Your sacrifice can be accepted. And God is doing that now through Samuel to the people. He's saying, hey, yes, you've rejected God as king, and we're there now.
Rain.
Yeah, we can't do anything about that. Because the judgment, so to speak, has already come upon you. But we don't have to continue in disobedience. don't turn aside.
Mhm.
Worship him with all your heart. That the golden rule. Worship the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, mind, and strength. From Deuteronomy.
I don't think that's the golden rule, though.
It's one of the two. Sorry.
That's not what
The
people
two
call
greatest
golden
commands.
rule. Okay.
Sorry. Thank you.
Now I feel bad.
No, it's fine. It's a good call out. I don't want to say something wrong. So Saul, the people are being told the same thing that Cain got told. Don't continue.
Yeah.
Make the sacrifice again. Make it worth. Do it with all your heart.
Well, and it also, with that context,
Mhm.
the confirmation from Samuel, where it's just, hey, no, God's going to have mercy. He's not going to wipe you out right now.
Yeah.
It shows it's this like, okay, so there's this judgment from your sin, but you're not going to be wiped out. Hey, don't go and sin now.
Yeah.
Right? Don't continue to on in this sin. It shows for the people of that time, God's eagerness to make it work.
Yeah. It's also like like in our own lives, I'm sure like whether like with our parents or like we acknowledge this or when we are sinning, there's moments where you can see where it leads.
Mhm.
You know where it's going to go if you continue walking down that path. And there's kind of like that acknowledgement in your head of now's a chance for me to turn around.
Mhm.
Now's a chance for me to not keep doing that. And then sometimes we continue.
Mhm.
And then sometimes the brain kicks in, the better part of us, and we go, I gotta stop. And yeah.
And they totally do stop sinning, and everything goes well, and Saul's a great king, and you will see none of that in the next episode.
Yep. End of the story. They never
So-
do anything wrong again.
I didn't talk about it too much yet because I think it matters more for the full culmination of the chapter. Do you see this as more of a covenantal shift for how God treats Israel? Sure, that happens more so with David, but in how it lays out this not new rules, but the same rules kind of reiterated with the king included in it. How it talks about the past, how it talks about God's deeds over them, this sort of legal kind of way. Do you see it as a form of covenantal shifting?
Depends on your view of Deuteronomy.
What does that mean?
I was just going to say the Davidic covenant starts with David. That was going to be my main takeaway. I also love how we're using covenantal shift in the same way as like continental drift.
No,
I
but
think
like,
it's funny.
but you're right there, Colton. There appears to be a shift in some regard to how God interacts with his people Israel in a small way, at least. You could say in a big way with David, perhaps, and depends on to a certain degree how much of Deuteronomy was written at that point. Was all of it? Are we going to say all of it? That's fine. I'm game.
I
I'm
think
down.
the safe answer is to say yes, all of it.
Sure.
But yeah, I mean, you can disagree, but either way doesn't change.
No,
much.
a lot of people disagree.
Yeah.
And so people, if Deuteronomy had been written fully in that beforehand, then it's not a covenantal shift because it's all laid out on how kingship is going to interact in the covenantal relationship in Moses' covenant.
Right. I mean,
so that's not a shift. It's just that's the next stage in the development that they already know.
Sure, but the covenantal shift comes more so in the how Israel is supposed to function in relationship to God for them to be considered righteous. It is no longer the people; it is the people and the king.
Sure, yeah.
Explicitly.
Yeah. We mentioned that.
David's
second.
covenant becomes more so about lineage and dynasty, more so than about how God treats the kings as representatives of Israel, although that is part of it.
Yeah.
This, as far as I'm aware, is the first time besides that part of those parts of Deuteronomy and the law that talk about how the king is part of the representative before God as God's anointed. Like God's anointed, besides like a prophet or a judge or even the people themselves and how they act towards them, how the king acts is more what God sees than just the people themselves.
Yes.
Yes, but that would be the covenantal shift. It's not just about the people, it's the people and the king.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
But
It's not significant. It's not like that's why I say shift and not like a change in the covenant.
Sure.
The covenant doesn't change; it just adds a new modifier to it,
Sure.
which was
I
already
suppose, yeah.
predicted, but now
Yeah.
is put into stone. This is what it is.
But I think you've always seen the actions of God's anointed being directly affecting God's people. Right? Even Moses' disobedience this is the first thing that comes to mind for me. Moses' disobedience striking the stone.
Sure.
Right? Did have a causative effect on how the nation of Israel was treated as a whole because of the disobedience of their leaders. And I think you can really just draw it right back to Adam's headship, right? That the sin of one man can doom the nation.
Well, sure.
And I think you have with the judges, with the failed judges, let's say, the judges which had success in the beginning and then fell away, right? Or had success, fell away, and came back.
Just like most of them.
Yeah. That had a causal effect in the general populace, let's say, of Israel at the time. However, the shift that Colton you might be referencing is that pattern may have existed before, but it's never existed with an office quite like kingship.
It's not the representatives who do sin. It's that the wording here is very explicitly the representative is now more of a representative of Israel than a representative of God.
I don't know about more of.
Because Moses was less a representative of the people towards God as he was a representative of God towards the people.
Well, and that might be emphasized with prophet stuff, right?
Sure.
Because that would be the role of the prophet, to speak the words of God. However, because I think that this chunk of text is far more focused on the king in relation to the people and the people's desire for a king, I think the emphasis of the text as the king as a representative of the people matches the context, matches the content of the passage. I don't know if it negates the other part of kingship, which is mentioned elsewhere, more particularly in Psalms by David, of the king being the representative of some intermediary way of God to the people. I don't think that that's negated. I just don't think that that's what's being commented on in 1 Samuel 12.
I'm actually sliding over to Colton's side, I think, a little bit. That there is, as this like new office comes into play, that it's a formalization of the already existing relationship. But because it is the nation of Israel specifically going after a king, that they are declaring headship not from the top down, but from the bottom up. Right? It's now the responsibility of the nation because they have elected this.
Maybe I'm not denying that there's a shift. Like, I mean, we spoke of it. Like,
I just the covenantal shift that he's talking about, I think is more obvious than I thought it was at the beginning.
okay. I think there is
That's
some
all I
sort of
wanted
shift.
to
Yeah.
bring up.
Okay.
Yeah. We mentioned it with like the whole how it's like what's explicitly not listed was what happens if the king is bad but the people are good.
Yeah.
It doesn't actually mention that. So,
Well, the reason I bring it up is if chapter 12 is somewhat not isolated, because it's not isolated from the two chapters that surround it, but is very much it's sort of standalone in what it talks about, that it is this kind of like treatise. This is now how God's relationship with you is. And it's being explicit, formalizing Samuel sort of stepping down from his position of power, despite him still being there. And this solidifying there is then recontextualizing the covenant around how this stepping down and this rising up would work.
sure.
Is that the purpose of the chapter, do you feel? Or a purpose of the chapter?
There was another thing I saw about how this is the point in which prophets become the classic, the way we see prophets in the rest of the Old Testament as like the hermit outside of the town that comes in and condemns the people and like says the words to the king, like, hey, you're messing up. God wants to tell you that. This is where the prophet becomes that. The judger or the leader of Israel gets separated from him And we mentioned that in the previous episode where you see like the prophet king kind of idea, and then like the king, the prophet priest and the king prophet with Samuel and Saul. And you see he's kind of removed now from he's not leading, he's advising.
Sure.
He's not representative of the people to God. He's representative of God to the people and the king.
Right.
And
that's probably reinforced with the whole legal. I'm innocent. You can go through.
Yeah.
I haven't stolen any of your donkeys or Samuel's.
And I'm retiring, but I'm still going to teach you.
Yeah.
Right. I'm not leading you anymore. This isn't on me. Don't come to me when you got issues. Go to the king. Like, I'm washing my hands of this. This is Saul's problem now. But there's an interesting, this is also, I think, one of the, like you were saying with Saul, we've got this shift, but then with David, we've got a shift. And this is a shift. This is one step up to we're getting closer to the Christ image.
Okay.
With king, because of Christ being, as we mentioned, you've got the priest prophet and the king prophet. And as we get further through the Old Testament, and then you get into post-exile, where you've got like the priest king with Joshua, you're starting to see the blending of these stations until eventually with the New Testament, you got Christ. It's the priest, prophet, king, Messiah. And so now we're seeing this junction between
and you see
the
that
two worlds.
Even brought out a little bit about with how Saul is like, but like, didn't he prophesy? Is Saul among the prophets? There's a little bit of a blurring there.
Yeah.
But then with Samuel, there's a bit of a blurring with, but he served in the temple. So he's a prophet and he's a priest. So there's some blurring there, some blurring there. There's some, interesting stuff.
So what I'm saying is like, yes, it's a shift in the covenant, but God is revealing the future relationship that will happen with the people ultimately.
Sure.
In the future.
Sure.
And I think that's
pattern that has come that will follow kind of thing. Yeah.
Well, and that makes the Saul fighting Nachash in the wilderness interesting also, like more so, because that's what Jesus did. Anyways.
He fought the Ammonites. Yep.
Fought the Ammonites. What else do we got? What else you got? I got more notes, but my iPad's off, so I'm going to turn that on.
I was quite content with what we got.
Yeah, me too.
Yeah, I was about to wrap up, but if you feel like you got something still on your heart or on your iPad,
Either one.
How mad do you think Samuel is at the people?
His emotions, like even in the first chapter when they desire a king, he says nothing.
That's true.
It's all God telling him to say things. And he says, don't worry, they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting me. And so it
seems like he was hurt at that point.
He does seem a little, yeah,
he does.
a little bitter.
I think we see his emotions in the next chapter.
Okay.
I think that's when we start to see what Samuel thinks about this whole thing.
Yeah.
Up until now, he's, like Saul, been passive. Just going along with the motions, telling people what God is saying and talking to God about what the people are doing as this kind of intermediary. And I think in the next one, when we see Saul and Samuel talk, we're like, oh, Samuel's been having these thoughts for a while.
Sure. Yeah.
What are you talking about? Our next installment in this series covers how everything goes well and Saul is an amazing king and doesn't drop the ball.
And as history has shown, everything just goes great after that.
Yeah. So, Joel, do you want to run us through the end here?
yeah, we're in the end zone, folks, and
Did we get 6 points in the...
It's scoring time.
yeah, and let's just
the
hold
home run?
touchdown on this last point here. This analogy's terrible. This is awful. This is the worst ending we've ever had.
Sport ball.
If you'd like to suggest a better ending, email us at secondratessaints@gmail.com. Check us out, or Yeah, Gmail. Yeah, what's up?
Or our other website, Arc Watchers.
Arcwatchers. Artwatchers.org.
Sorry, what?
Shut up.
What is an
Dude,
art watcher?
Art, you gotta watch the newest episode that's coming out like right now.
I missed
It's so good. Archwalkers.
What?
Archwalkers is a different domain I also want to own. Again, the worst ending we've had since the Arc episode.
Do you want to retry?
Thanks. No, we don't want to retry. Thank you for listening. Thanks for making it this far. If you've put up with our terrible touchdowns, then check us out at secondраtesaints.com. Email us at secondраtesaints@gmail.com. Check us out on our Twitter at secondраtesaints. And also Instagram by the same name. We were able to get most of our handles. The Lord made you special, and he loves you very much. Bye-bye.